All right, so the way that JBez wanted to build out the atmosphere inside the shop is where the sound is immersive, right? It fills the entire room, but we can control it based off the environments where the barbers can have a conversation with their customers.
Right.
At the same time, we create this kind of holy shit experience for the overall aesthetic of the shop. How are we going about that?
So yeah, that's the real big design challenge here, was to find something that was immersive, right? And for us, immersive is a holy shit experience, but at the same time controlled, right? And so the way we thought about doing that is to have a system that would kind of place the audio at everybody's ear without having them necessarily being blasted by the ear. Like, instead of having a big speaker on one side of the shop or a couple big speakers throughout the space and kind of filling the sound with it, we wanted kind of the shop itself to emanate, right? And because the shop itself can emanate, it means you have a bunch more kind of distributed pieces that each individually does not have to be super loud. And so that's why we ended up using the technology that we ended up using, because they're all meant to be emanative and kind of extruding sound instead of forcing sound out through and instead of being super loud.
Got it. So I mean, like, keep in mind, right? So we have kind of the main room, we have another side for the barbers, and we have a lounge area, right?
Right.
So let's walk a little bit into the main room,
Yeah.
and kind of talk about how we're going about that. So, especially with sound system, right? We can't just go with a point and shoot sound system,
Right.
Because
it
then
wouldn't work in here. It's also really echoey and
it's very echoey. So if we did like a traditional cone speaker system, we would have speakers over there, kind of pushing in.
Right.
It would all bounce, reverb, all these kind of things would happen
Exactly.
inside the facility. So what was the approach you wanted to take when it comes to the system we did? Because right now we're leveraging these things called DML panels, right?
Right.
So why we want to go about DML
Yeah.
panels? Why do we want to go with the DML panels that are like more located on this side?
Yeah, so the cool thing about DML, which by the way, DML stands for Distributed Mode Loudspeaker, which is kind of cool because what we've made is kind of a distributed PA or a distributed, amplifier. But by having the DML, it means that there's no point source of it. So nothing's shooting at people. There's no single speaker. There's no single source that's shooting at somebody. It's kind of emanating from every panel. We use 1/8 inch thick foam board and we're exciting each of those boards in order to reproduce the frequency range that we're trying to go for here in the studio. And all of that is for all high frequencies and even down to mid frequencies. We ended up cutting some of the low frequencies just so that way they'd be a little more stable on top of the ceiling or the wall and ceiling. But we thought the really cool thing is that since they kind of emanate, we can kind of place them across the entire ceiling and spread them out so that way no matter where somebody is, they're kind of getting a little impression of what's happening in the sound signature. And the cool part about that is that we have very explicit control over left, center, and right. And coupled with a couple of custom-built subwoofers, we can either extend the range of the subwoofers to cover some of the DML range, or we can actually extend these DML panels, which we actually did because they're surprisingly stable, to reproduce many of the lower mid-frequencies.
So what overall, we always are so used to traditional speakers, right?
Yeah.
That are pointing and pushing sound towards you. What's the difference between a DML, right, and your traditional speaker?
Right, so DML emanates sound. The whole entire panel becomes something that vibrates. Normally, what speakers do is that they vibrate and they push air towards somebody, right? And so that's awesome if you're trying to shoot something from across the way. But if you're trying to get a cut, that's probably not the most encouragingly embraceable
The
thing.
barber can't really talk to the
Right,
customer,
because then
right?
you're fighting. You're trying to shoot sound, and then the sound is also shooting yourself out of there. So it's kind of hard to have both things competing against each other. So the cool thing about DML is because the whole panel becomes the thing that vibrates, and again, it just emanates from the panel. All the air around it gets disrupted. It means it kind of results in something where it's like there's a whisper of the music that's all around you, and no matter where you go in the room, it's a little whisper, and that's not competing with the barber that's trying to talk to you directly.
Got it. So the way that we want to really set this up, right, is DML's on top, cleanly emanating the sound, so it's kind of full-bodied around you, right? You got left and right center signal. We got the subs playing the lower frequency, so now you get the kind of like the studio level kind of like clean sound of like high frequencies, low frequencies.
We actually were surprised because these panels are actually, just because they're foam core, they're so thin and light that they actually reproduce a lot of the frequencies a lot better than we thought they would.
Yeah.
So we thought that we were going to have to do a lot of kind of correction to these things to get a good frequency response. And we ended up not having it. Just the sheer fact that we had so many of the panels means that it was enough sound pressure coming from all of them that we didn't have to do too much EQing to get them to have a really balanced or even a studio level quality sound.
Got it. So what does that mean when it comes to the shop aesthetic we talked in the beginning, right? So we want to make sure that the barbers can have a good conversation with their customers, right? It's a full embodied sound. It feels like it's surrounding you. What does it mean with the shop aesthetic? We're talking right now about the main room, right? We got the DMLs, we got the subs. But what does it mean when we have, stuff on both sides of the spectrum?
Yeah, so it kind of results in this thing where you can walk around anywhere of the facility and you get this kind of sensation that you're listening to something at every sense of it. But it's the same listening sensation that we're talking about, which was a very prescribed, intentional way of having it whisper around you at all times. So like right now there's music playing and it may not even be coming through the microphone, but it's still very present in each of our ears just because it's all around us. And if I step one step to the right, one step to the left, I get a gradient instead of hot spots.
Got it. So realistically, what you're saying is like with traditional speakers, what we get in this atmosphere, if we were trying to deck it out with like the best sound system that exists with traditional speakers, we would have hot spots where it sounds fantastic, and then we have cold spots where it sounds absolutely awful due to the fact that you're just not in the range at what the trajectory is of that speaker. But since we have DML panels located with all the way on the left, all the way in the center, all the way on the right, we're able to create this really immersive feeling where you're still getting the whole kind of, left and right surround, right? But you're still not restricted to the old atmosphere you can have in the shop.
Exactly. It's like instead of a solid, it's a liquid. Instead of having a single thing somewhere, it's just melted across like butter. Like butter everywhere is like a smooth, warm, friendly, inviting environment, which is cool. And that's why we use stuff other than point source speakers for these types of environments, is because they're just naturally, the physics of them make them naturally better suited for this type of thing.
Okay, so obviously we're talking about the main room here. We have another side of the shop. We have another 2 barbers over here, and we wanted to build that atmosphere. We have surround all of that side. On this side, we still have additional panels, located all the way on the top. What we're trying to build with the aesthetic over here, because we have one set of panels, one set of sub. How does that mean with the transference of the sound and how creating that whole ultimate experience?
So the whole idea that we're trying to go for is one continuous sound experience throughout the whole shop. And I think because of the way that we ended up doing the lounge area over here, it carries from one set of it over to this side of it. And so on this side, because we had a little bit of less real estate to work with, we were able to combine both the left and right signals and give kind of a mono signal, which is totally fine because over here we just needed to extend the sound to these 2 stations. And having the subs distributed in different corners of the shop, smaller subs distributed, means that we have a more consistent sub experience. So the low frequencies, since they naturally propagate wider, they're on all 3 furthest corners of the shop, making this kind of perfect soup of sub that you can kind of walk through and feel the sound pressure everywhere you go. And the mono signal over here just kind of adds to the extension of what is coming from the rest of the room.
Got it. So what we're able to really control here, right, is we have a soft atmosphere for kind of full embodied surround experience of sound for all the barbers, all the customers, while they're getting a cut. But the other experience we really wanted to build in here is this kind of like holy shit lounge experience, right? Like the kind of centerpiece. So let's talk about that a little bit. So
I guess we could have stopped at just the sound for the shop.
We could have, but like we always got to take it one extension further, and
we wouldn't be edge sound research if we didn't.
Exactly. We always got to kind of push the barriers of what that sound reproduction really looks like, right? So explain to me this soundbar, right? Like we're so used to soundbars. We're so used to them, right? We're so used to a soundbar that's pushing sound towards you. Soundbars are becoming more prevalent inside of homes, inside of shops. But what's so unique and different about this soundbar we're trying to create right here?
I think the way we should start this is what experience were we trying to make here in the first place? This lounge, because of the space requirement, the experience that they were trying to go for, they're trying to go for an elevated experience that was beyond even what the store was doing, for concentrated events, for video game tournaments, movie premieres, watching series and stuff like that, and for dedicated like music video and very high experience watching. So we knew we had to make something that was beyond what was even available. So yes, the 2 options that made sense because of the space requirement and the experience requirement was a custom soundbar and a custom implementation of our ResonX technology into a couch that was graciously donated. And the way we went with the soundbar, there are many ways to make a soundbar, but there's only one edge sound research way to make a soundbar.
Absolutely.
And it is to put the absolute limit of speaker technology in it, always. And so in here what we have is a cousin of the DMLs. So DML stands for distributed mode loudspeaker, and that means that the weight bending parts of the panel are distributed all throughout the device. But what happens if you shrink that thing down and you're really moving it back and forth almost pistonically like your traditional speaker. Well, then you get the best of both worlds with something called a balanced mode radiator.
Yeah.
What it means is that it balances the modes between pistonically pushing air and then chaotically exciting the air around the panel. So that's exactly what these little front surfaces are, little tiny surfaces of the exciters that we have all the way around the room, and then they're encased with a little a gasket that allows them to function like a speaker. And what that means is that there's an incredibly wide soundstage over here, and that's why you can walk from one end to the other side of the barbershop and have this consistent experience, because there's nothing that's shooting forward, it's always shooting out and around. So you're still getting the benefits of the wide chaotic, but you're also getting a really, really cool holy shit experience when you crank it up.
So just so I can kind of like comprehend what you're explaining right now, right? So we got like, traditional soundbars, right? Each speaker driver is a cone, and it's pushing sound in kind of like this.
Like a V shape, exactly.
Kind of a V shape, kind of directly towards.
Kind of a Hadouken.
And if you're not directly in front of it, it doesn't sound very good, right? But if you're in front of it sounds fantastic.
Right.
That's like the traditional things when it comes to sound systems. What we're talking about here when it comes to BMR is that instead of it being here, it's really just wide. It's completely kind of separated out.
It's almost like a mushroom instead of a cone. Yeah.
And since we have 8 drivers, what it's really doing here is that it's elevating the sound. The entire lounge is filling up with the sound as the DML panels are in the main room and also on the other side of the shop.
Right.
It's really kind of propelling that sound outside. So now when you're walking from one area to the other area of the shop, it's just consistent, clean sounding feel, right?
That's right, yeah. And so, because of all the advantages of having a BMR that gets kind of the best of both worlds in kind of a small package, we honestly probably could have done the entire JBez thing with just a soundbar, or maybe 2 soundbars. So we kind of went overkill and having the entire system plus making what is essentially a whole system here. To give some specs on paper here, we have 8 BMRs. Each are capable of reproducing frequencies well below 80 hertz down to 60 and even 40. We don't have them EQ'd almost at all. Just they're almost as natural as possible right now. Of course, we'll come back and kind of optimize it a little bit later, but for right now, they're completely unoptimized, and they already sound so good because they all kind of work in concert with each other because of the nature of the way that they're made, and they can reproduce really well 40 to 80 hertz, which is like sub-frequency ranges, stuff that you normally need a subwoofer for because of the nature of how big these are and how much they can actually move air, and they work in concert with each other. They move a lot of air, and they have this incredibly wide sound stage that you can kind of hear everything. So far, the movies we've watched on this have been some of the amazing things that we've ever seen, just with the soundbar itself.
So let's talk a little bit about how we coupled this with our patent pending technology, right?
Absolutely.
So our patent pending technology allows you to both feel and hear sound in high fidelity, right? And everything we talked about so far is about audible hearing, right?
That's right. Most
you're able to
people
hear,
have
you're able to kind of like immerse yourself in the environment.
Yeah.
But the other thing we kind of brought up right here is this couch setup, right? So this kind of texture that we have right here on the couch is transferring that audible information that we're able to hear and understand, right? And translate that into feeling. Right. So you're also able to tactile sensation of actually understanding the information you're hearing into the feeling sense.
That's right, yeah.
So why do we want to go about that? What does that create in the ultimate environment of this holy shit lounge that we wanted to go for?
In our holy shit lounge, what that does is it allows people while they're waiting to get their cut, or while they're enjoying the experience, to get exactly what you're talking about, that extra sensation of what they're hearing in the room. So right now we have a song by G. Bautista, and it's very low, but at the same time, if we had a subwoofer in the big of the room, a big subwoofer for this holy shit experience, it would be so quiet that it wouldn't be able to propagate to this point of it without having to interfere with other people.
Absolutely.
So by having the sense of touch, it goes directly into the listener's body without having to compete with other sound sources. While we're talking to people, we can rely on our ears for that, but then we can rely on our bodies to get the full immersion of what else is happening and not disrupt anything else.
Got it. So what does it really mean by feeling sound, right? Like this is a thing we've been really kind of like trying to figure out how to articulate over the last 2 years, right? It's a challenging phenomenon because we're so used to listening and enjoying sound experiences based off our ears.
Right.
But we're really introducing a new format of these audio experiences called experiential audio, where not only are you just hearing stuff, but you're also feeling that sound experience. Like if you're at a concert, right in front of that subwoofer, but without destroying your ears and having a good time. So what does that transfers of audio really mean at the end of the day?
So I guess the way to explain this is kind of explain the background and history of people that are kind of deaf and hard of hearing. I myself was hard of hearing, as probably the story goes, that means that people that are hard of hearing kind of hear things a little differently because you can't rely on your ears so much. So the kind of story and the history of listening through touch comes from those who don't have the reliability of using their ears. And so what happens is that over time your other senses compensate.
Yeah.
And so the sense of touch is the next nearest thing that sound waves hit when they hit your body. Even as you're talking to me, your sound waves are actually coming out of your chest and through your mouth and hitting me on the body, as well as going through my ears. My ears are better at picking up higher frequencies, but my body still takes in low frequencies. So we're actually already kind of primed on feeling low frequencies ever since you came out of your mother, because your mother's heartbeat was the first thing that you experienced as a fetus. And so what happens is that if you keep kind of thinking about it and exploring touch as a sense of understanding content, you can actually get that sensation back of it and even rely on that information. So me and my team have been already training for a year, and we're starting to rely on our sense of touch to be able to understand what's happening in mixes and making music, and that can be easily picked up by other people, and if they don't want to focus on it, they can just kind of tap into that primal sensation that they had from when they were a kid. And so everyone can kind of get a benefit from having tactile audio, whether they're hard of hearing or not.
So pretty much what you're breaking down to me, right, is there's still a certain amount of information that we cannot perceive through our audible ears, right? Mm-hmm. There's a certain frequency range we cannot sense through our audible
as easily,
senses,
correct,
right?
Yeah.
But the feeling sense adds this multi-dimensionality to audio, and we're right now in an age where, like, spatial audio is a huge thing, and I do think that it is a huge phenomenon that is leveraging existing audio technologies to make it better, but it's just still based off the hearing sense.
Right.
What you're really articulating to me is that we're not just stuck on the hearing sense of audible kind of sound. Really, audio experiences should be both multidimensional in the essence that you hear and you feel it, which makes it actually feel real, because in the real world, that's how we sense it.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's very succinct.
I mean,
excellent.
After years of us
you've heard this a million times.
Exactly. Well, I think the last thing we should kind of break down when it comes to this whole facility, right, is how do we control this whole thing? We really talked about the main room, the other side of the room, the lounge area.
Right.
How do we control this entire thing? So let's talk a little bit about the control panel.
We have here our first control panel for this type of a system. Really was just trying to figure out how can we give them some flexibility and some control over controlling all the power that they have available to them. They have about well over 1,600 or so watts of power going through this. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but for the technology that we're using, it doesn't take as much energy to be able to propagate that information to other areas of the body, right? Or other areas of the shop. And so, what's it called? 100 watts going through the air and hitting you is nothing. 100 watts touching your body is something.
It's a lot, yeah.
So 1,600 watts of all that power around here is kind of a lot. So we don't want to have anybody blast themselves at any moment. So we gave them some control. Say, hey, if the subs are a little bit too much, we can turn down the subs. If that area is a little bit popping, then we can turn down the other side of it. If we want this side really be popping, but he's working on somebody who needs to be able to hear him, then they can have individual controls. We also made it so that way the lounge can be completely separate than the rest of the system, which was a really cool challenge. And we also made it so that way anybody can come and plug in their computer, their PS5, their Xbox, and have a gaming tournament over here, and how this can be completely separate than the rest of the shop. And so, a lot of it was just seeing how much flexibility we can give them, and also make sure the entire thing's Bluetooth enabled, so anybody can walk in the shop, say, hey, give me the Bluetooth, and I can play my music and have a good experience here.
Got it. So, I mean, the ultimate end goal here, right, like what we talked about at the beginning, is creating a sound experience that is like full embodied, hyper immersive, really providing those different layers that we're talking about for where the barbers can talk with the customers, but you still have this like wow factor associated with the sound experience.
Yeah.
And we're optimizing based off that experience, not necessarily like every decision we made in the shop is not based off we're trying to just push products in, but we're looking at what is the overall aesthetic of the experience, and then reverse engineering ways that we can actually put, sound bars, DML panels, a couch, all these things, and intertwine it in a way that you can control that aspect to make sure that every single person who comes to the shop has a really good time, good atmosphere, but at the same time, you can then control it based on the atmosphere you want to create. So like, let's say we want to have a gaming tournament, we want to have an open mic session, we want to add these different things. we have a centralized control panel.
That's right.
Which then allows us to control that environment you can have in the shop.
Exactly, yeah. We took the experience and we said, what do we know how to make and what can we make to be able to fulfill that experience? And it was 100% experience focus only. They said, this is exactly what we want to do. And we said, great, we will do, this is the best ways to make that happen. Yeah, leveraging our existing products and other things we had to make custom for the end goal.
Got it. So overall, this is a great walkthrough of all the IP we were able to implement directly into JBez Barbershop. Really based off the knowledge we learned from what the aesthetic we wanted in the shop.
Right.
Great example of what edge down research can really do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, come check out, JBez Barbershop. Come check out what we've been able to do here when it comes to the sound experience. And let us know what this means when it comes to a full embodied experience that you both hear sound, feel sound, and have a great time. Any last comments you want to tell anybody when it comes to JBez Barbershop? And
come through. Come have a album release party. Come have a gaming tournament. This place is set up. It's probably one of the best sound systems I think we've made and experienced so far.
Yeah. So welcome to the first retail experience with Edge Down Research.